Let's take you live to Jerusalem now. We can speak to my colleague Mark Lowen, who is there. Mark, bring us up to date with the very latest we have on this potential deal and other developments in the conflict.
Well, Lucy, the negotiations continue, of course, in Qatar with the Qatari government sounding very hopeful at the moment, and the Americans too, and Hamas, as you said there, in terms of progress on the deal. We are yet to receive that kind of positivity from the Israelis, although there are reports on an Israeli media saying that a war cabinet will meet later on today, with the understanding that all members of the cabinet would need to agree on any deal which would see the release of Palestinian prisoners. So that is a sign that there is a real progress potentially being made also from the Israeli side. But of course there have been hold-ups within the Israeli cabinet, we understand, over the duration of any sort of cessation of hostilities and the number of Palestinian prisoners who could be released. Let's bring you a little bit an update also on the fighting on the ground, because the Israeli Defense Forces say that they have surrounded the Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza, saying that they are preparing the area for combat, and they say that the Palestinians have been hitting back with anti-tank missiles and explosive devices. Well, let's pick up on what is the latest both in the hostage situation and the developments on the ground in Gaza. We can speak now live to Mark Regev, who is senior advisor to Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who joins us. Mr. Regev, thank you very much indeed for being with us here on BBC News. You'll be aware, of course, that Hamas says that they are close to a truce. The Americans and Qataris are sounding rather positive as well. How close are we to a deal on the hostage release?
So we might be closer than ever before, but it's not done until it's done. And it's like, to use maybe a sexist expression, it's like being a little bit pregnant. You either are or you aren't. And maybe we're getting close. And if we are getting close, it's because Hamas needs that ceasefire. We've been hitting them hard. We've been crippling their military machine. We've been taking apart their military fortifications. We've been taking out their military commanders. And they need a breather. And maybe this has incentivized them, because, as you know, we've said we will only agree to a temporary ceasefire for the release of our hostages. And so maybe this has motivated them to finally get serious.
I think that's probably not what the families of the hostages would say, Mr. Regev, who believe that your government has prioritised the military operations over the release of hostages, with anger among relatives of the hostages spilling over towards your Prime Minister.
Well, from the community of the families, yes, and last night the Prime Minister met with them. It wasn't his first meeting, but it was his first meeting with so many of them at once. You hear different things. Some hostages' families say there shouldn't be a single bottle of water sent into Gaza as long as their family is held hostage. Others have said the opposite. Yes, we have to tone down the pressure on Hamas. You hear all sorts of opinions. And of course, anyone who has a relative who's been taken hostage by Hamas in Gaza, we have to give them support and hug them and give them our sympathy and help them get through this difficult time. Ultimately, we've got to remember, of the hostages, there are 32 children, Mark. That's 32 children, of which there is a 10-month-old baby who was 9 months when he was taken hostage. He was a hostage before he could walk or talk. There are also infants, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds amongst the hostages. And if you're a parent of one of these children, how do you feel? It's obviously very, very difficult for the families. So we embrace the families. At the same time, we are convinced as a government, and our intelligence points to this very clearly, if there is now a chance, a serious chance of getting hostages out, it's only because Hamas needs that time out. Hamas wants that temporary ceasefire, and we've been very, very clear. There will only be a temporary ceasefire for the release of our people.
What can you tell us about the shape of any deal in terms of numbers who could be released from Israeli prisons and numbers of hostages you would be hoping to be released by Hamas?
Obviously, we'll want the maximum number of people out that is possible. But I can't go into details. I apologize. I can't go into details on this conversation. These details are being discussed, and until the deal is announced, if it will be announced, will it become public? Obviously, as you said in your introductory remarks, We're a democracy. If there is an agreement, it will have to go through not just the inner war cabinet, but the security cabinet and the entire government will have to vote for this to support such a release. And of course, in Israel, we also have judicial review. And in the past, if there are the release of prisoners involved in any such arrangement, that we have to give time for people, the families of people who've been killed in the past by terrorists, who can petition the court about a release. That's also part of our process. It can all be done relatively quickly. But as a democracy, one has to go through all the correct processes before this is done.
What have been the stumbling blocks to a deal as far as the Israeli government has been concerned? Because we understand there has been opposition from some parts of the cabinet to the duration of any cessation of hostilities. And of course, previous Palestinian prisoners who have been released, I'm thinking about the deal over Gilad Shalit, the Israeli soldier who was kidnapped before. Well, one of those released was the Hamas leader in Gaza. So I suppose that there will be discussion over the identity exactly of those Palestinian prisoners to be released.
So all that is correct, and you have to add to that the one overriding factor. No one in Israel has any illusions about who we're dealing with. Yes, we're dealing with a brutal, extreme, fanatical terrorist organization, and we saw the sort of violence that they are capable of. And even today, when they say things, we know, they deny killing civilians on October 7th. These are people who lie through their teeth. They say the most ridiculous things divorced from reality. So that is why I'm urging caution. I believe we're closer than ever before. But once again, we rightfully have no illusions about who Hamas is and what they're about. And we have to wait. This is only done when it's done.
I want to quote you one poll in the Jerusalem Post recently that only 4% of Israelis now trust Benjamin Netanyahu at the moment. He has record low approval ratings. Can your Prime Minister really stay in power during this crisis when he has such low support?
So the truth is, there's, I think, an outpouring, and you're here, you can see it. There's a very strong consensus behind the goals of this operation, which is to destroy Hamas, to get our hostages back, and to create a new reality in Gaza so it's no longer a threat to the people of Israel. And behind those three principles, those three goals, there's a huge consensus in Israel. It includes the official opposition, as you know, headed by Mr. Lapid, and it also includes a newly strengthened government, because in the framework of the war, we've brought in opposition parties who have joined the government and have widened its coalition base. Now, there'll be a time for politics when this is all over. But at the moment, Israel is focused on victory, and we understand to achieve that victory, we need unity, and that's what people are focused on now.
You talk about unity and you talk about people rallying behind the government at the moment. Let me just quote a few things that members of the government and indeed ex-ministers have said in recent days. Your agriculture minister has said, "We are rolling out the Gaza Nakba," using that word that Palestinians used to refer to the creation of the State of Israel, catastrophe in 1948 when hundreds of thousands were forced from their homes. The intelligence minister says the international community should finance the resettlement of Gazans abroad, out of the Gaza Strip. Your ex-information minister has said there is a need to erase all of Gaza from the face of the earth. Are these comments of a government seeking a long-term solution and peace with those in Gaza?
Well, first of all, former ministers can say whatever they like because they're former ministers that don't represent the government. So let's put that aside. As to the agricultural minister, he talked about a Nakba, a disaster. And in many ways, like 1948, 1949, there is a Nakba. Then in 48-49, it was brought about by extremists who rejected a compromise with Israel and said all or nothing. And in the end, they brought the Palestinian people nothing. And Hamas is the same. Hamas has brought amazing tragedy to the people of Gaza. I don't think anyone doubts that. They started this war. They initiated this crisis. Did the people of Gaza really want all this? Surely it is a self-imposed suffering by a leadership that's so extreme it's out of touch with reality.
Yeah, but do you not understand, Mr. Regev, the fear, the real fear of Gazans that they will, and they are in the process of being forced out of their homeland and could be forced out of their homeland, with your government calling on them to crowd into an area in southern Gaza of 14 square kilometers, the only safe zone, and some Gazans feeling there is nowhere else to flee.
Well, let's be clear. We don't want to see Gazan civilians caught up in the crossfire between the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, and the terrorists. And so we've designated zones where we know we don't expect there to be fighting. And we urge people to move there. Now, we understand that it's not easy to move. And I know some people from the north have already moved somewhere, and we're asking them to move again. But I'm the child of a refugee. My father in the Second World War was a refugee, and he had to move from place to place to save his life. I think ultimately it's all a matter of risk management. And as much as it's difficult to move, it still must be done. People have to move out of combat. We don't want to see innocent civilians caught up in harm's way. And I believe we'll see the international community, with our support, move into this area, this safer zone in the western part of the southern Gaza Strip. We'll move in there with tents, with field hospitals, with massive support. And so for these people who are there temporarily for the duration of the conflict...
We're talking about, I'm sorry to interrupt you, we're talking about 1.5 million people who have been displaced. And you're talking about a 14 square kilometre area, which we can see there in a picture provided by the Israeli Defense Force, is just an absolutely tiny area. The UN and aid agencies are saying it is a recipe for disaster, with overcrowding and disease likely to spread like wildfire.
So, first of all, it's all a matter, as I said, if you want perfect solutions in a war, you probably won't find any. And then we have to ask Hamas why they started this war. But that area can fit many tens of thousands of people. And I'm actually a bit, you've seen the map.
Million?
Yes. No, but then there'll be other places, because you'll see fighting end in other places and then people can go there. In other words, we're talking about a dynamic situation. But please let me say something. The same international organizations, we've shared this map with them for a while now, and they say they can't set up humanitarian support, tents, field hospitals, and so forth, because they can't be seen as being complicit in Israel's war aims. Okay, so they say people have to move there first, and then they'll set up the humanitarian. Okay, that was their decision, not ours.
Can I ask you about the day after, when the guns fall silent, Mr. Regev? Aren't you simply creating an entire future generation of insurgents in Gaza and people who will ultimately hate Israel because of this operation? You can eliminate Hamas, potentially, but you can't eliminate the ideology, can you?
You can't eliminate the ideology, but you can have them out of government. You can have them without a military. And just as ISIS is still an ideology, it doesn't control territory, and therefore its ability to inflict harm on others is limited. It will be the same with Hamas. And I would propose that you think about the following. Surely when this is over, and people will have seen what Hamas has brought to Gaza, where their extremism leads, where their fanaticism leads, where their crazy ideology leads, that will be discredited by the people of Gaza. And I believe when Hamas is discredited, that will create an opportunity, that will create space for more moderate and pragmatic voices. I mean, ultimately, the people of Gaza can see today where Hamas has led them. And surely that sort of approach can't have anyone who can think, yes, can't support that approach is very good for the Palestinian people.
Mark Regev, Senior Advisor to Israel's Prime Minister, thank you very much indeed for your time today and for your thoughts. Plenty to pick up on